The Warhammer world is full of blighted places, sites cursed by dark magic and fell deeds. The machinations of demons, vampires, and Skaven have corrupted entire regions, twisting them for their own dark purposes. Both of the planet's poles are evil lands beyond the bounds of human sanity. Outside of these literal portals to hell, however, one would be hard-pressed to find somewhere more horrid, more perverse than the dark citadel of Nagashizzar. Translating as the glory of Nagash in Nehekaran, this is the ancient fortress of the great necromancer, Nagash. Also known as the Cursed Pit, uncountable atrocities have been committed in its shadow, and the mere mention of its name sends shivers down the spines of even hardened witch hunters. Nagashizzar stands at the crossroads of northeastern Nehekara, the southern World's Edge Mountains, and the southwestern Darklands. Overlooking the Sour Sea to the south, encircled by mountains, and surrounded by a blasted desert known as the Desolation of Nagash, the hostile terrain surrounding Nagashizzar makes the region almost completely inaccessible to mortal life. Even if an army can somehow reach the Foul Citadel, they will be confronted by one of the most formidable fortresses in the entire world. Nagash's servants carved Nagashizzar from Crippled Peak, and the mountain acts as an initial shield against incoming foes. Siege engines capable of toppling the thickest castle walls are little use against the hundreds, if not thousands of feet of solid stone enclosing Nagashizzar's critical locations. Over about 150 years, from -1500 to -1350 IC, the undead bored through the stone to create a honeycomb of tunnels, mines, and chambers. These paths stretch from the very top of the mountain, nearly half a mile above the surrounding terrain, to its very roots, a mile below the surface. Towers pepper Cripple Peak's surface, acting as garrison positions for Nagashizzar's defenders. Screaming skull catapults, enchanted statues wielding immense bows, and ballistae that fire magical giant bones are but some of the tower's defenses. The only way in or out of the fortress are 4 immense gates, forged from some unknown metal 10 times stronger than steel. They shine with an eerie black light, as if any light that touches it is consumed and corrupted before being spat out once more. If an enemy somehow manages to breach these defenses, they will find themselves met with a vast horde of undead creatures. While a mere fraction of Nagash's former legions, these abominations are more than enough to repel almost any force the mortal world can raise against them. In addition to these impressive defenses, both natural and artificial, Nagashizzar also lays claim to a deposit of Warpstone. Thousands of years ago, long before the birth of Nagash, an immense Warpstone meteor smashed into the mountain that would eventually become Cripple Peak. The impact and resulting ash cloud spread Warpstone particles throughout the surrounding region. Its mutating power corrupted the land around the impact site, turning once fertile land into desert, and polluting what would eventually become the Sour Sea into an inhospitable, acidic broth. These ecological disasters would only be enhanced as the Warpstone meteor eroded, releasing further particulates into the surrounding environment. While this provided much of Nagashizzar's defensive geography, its true value lies in the still intact fragments of Warpstone under the mountain. This material, essentially chaos given a geologic appearance, can be used to enhance magical rituals. Indeed, it was only by harvesting and utilizing these immense Warpstone deposits that Nagash was able to kill and reanimate the entirety of Nehekara with one terrifying spell. It was for this reason, perhaps even more so than its formidable defenses, that Nagash decided to establish his dark citadel at Cripple Peak. Of course, such a large quantity of Warpstone has not been ignored by the rest of the world's inhabitants. The Skaven, in particular, lust after Nagashizzar's vast Warpstone deposits, and they began assaulting the fort almost immediately after it was completed. Many clans tried to independently capture the fortress for themselves, though none of them came even close to inconveniencing the Great Necromancer. In -1300 IC, however, the Council of 13 took command of the situation personally, and a true war between the Skaven and Undead began. The War of Cripple Peak, as it came to be called, lasted for 100 years, and neither side was able to achieve a decisive victory. The relatively unified might of Skavendom was a foe without end and endlessly creative, but the necromantic power of Nagash was unequaled, and his numbers somehow even greater. Towards the end, both parties knew that the war wasn't worth the effort. While Nagash was never personally threatened by the Ratmen, his plans and schemes were slowed by the unending battles. The Skaven, for their part, realized that at best they could stalemate the Nehekaran for eternity, and at worst, they would be drowned in a tide of their own dead. With these pressures in mind, Nagash and the Skaven were eventually able to negotiate a ceasefire. In return for providing the Skaven with a small quantity of Warpstone, the Ratmen would lure several green-skinned tribes towards Nagashizzar, presumably so Nagash could execute and reanimate them for his upcoming war against Nehekara. This peace was uneasy, however, and only lasted for 3 years before the Skaven orchestrated Nagash's assassination with a weapon so potent that not even immortals were immune to its effects: the Fellblade. Following Nagash's defeat, Nagashizzar, and more importantly, its Warpstone deposits were claimed by the Skaven of Clan Rikek. Mining the evil mineral and selling it to the other clans made Clan Rikek rich beyond their wildest dreams, and for 1,000 years Nagashizzar was held in Skaven pause. 100 years before the foundation of Sigmar's empire, however, a hooded man dared to knock upon one of the 4 great gates. The Skaven guards rushed out, eager to torment this foolish man-thing, only to discover that it was none other than Nagash reborn. The restored necromancer tore through his former fortress, exterminating the entire clan in a single night. The true king of Nagashizzar repelled a follow-up Skaven invasion shortly afterwards, but this siege only lasted for a few months before the Ratmen withdrew. While undead sentries still patrol the lowest tunnels in search of Skaven intruders to this day, Nagashizzar has remained safely within Nagash's clutches in the ensuing 2.5 millennia. He seldom leaves the fortress now. Instead, he is content to sit upon a throne of skulls and command his minions from miles away with telepathic messages. Recent history has seen Nagashizzar's tranquil fate change. In 2522 IC, a High Elf host, led by the greatest heroes of Ulthuan, attacked the fortress in search of the Everqueen's daughter, the Everchild. The elves successfully breached its walls and made their way to Nagash's personal chambers. Though they succeeded in rescuing their quarry, at least for a time, there was no sign of Nagash himself. He appeared to have abandoned his fortress in the build-up to the end times, or perhaps faded away entirely, the lingering effects of the Fellblade finally dissipating his foul spirit. Whatever the case, the Great Necromancer returned to Nagashizzar following his return to nearly full power at the hands of Archon the Black and Manfred von Karstein. With the aid of his greatest servants, he set about rallying his forces for the upcoming war with Nehekara before performing one final ritual. From his fortress, Nagash unleashed a black cloud of necromantic energy over Nehekara once again. This cloud empowered his minions, giving Nagash an advantage over the Tomb Kings. After this, the Necromancer appears to have abandoned Nagashizzar once again, this time for good. He had already bound the Wind of Death to Sylvania following his resurrection, and this would prove to be far more useful than mere Warpstone. Nagashizzar was left to gather dust, while Sylvania would be Nagash's new home until the world itself was destroyed. In Total War Warhammer, Nagashizzar is the capital settlement of the Broken Teeth province. It begins the game infested by the Skaven of Clan Carrion, which has already been covered in its own video. This isn't a minor infestation either. The settlement starts at Tier 5 and has an 18-unit garrison, most of which is Storm Vermin and Gutter Runners. It's also got a nearly 20-stack army of Skaven in it, and by the time you can actually get an army over there, I can guarantee you're fighting at least 40 Skaven before any summons come out. You can't exactly bum rush it, but you'll still want to capture the settlement relatively quickly if you're playing as the Vampire Counts or Coast. Nagashizzar has a unique landmark, the Great Halls of Nagashizzar, that's available to all factions, but its effects depend on if you're playing vampires or someone else. For vampiric factions, the halls give 450 gold a turn, increase vampiric corruption by 50 in the local province, gives all your armies faction-wide 5% physical resistance and a 20% cooldown time on all spells, and reduces raised dead costs by 20%. For everyone else, the Great Halls of Nagashizzar provide 200 gold, immunity to vampiric corruption, a massive plus 10 leadership bonus against undead factions for all armies, and double experience gain when fighting the undead. Unfortunately, it also gives vampiric corruption in the region a 50-point boost. That's a bit of a double-edged sword, and may not make it worth the effort if you've already purged most of the world's undead. If you do want to build it, be sure to put lots of public order buildings in the province, because there's no way you can overcome corruption that intense. That brings us to the end of our overview of Nagashizzar. It also marks the beginning of my favorite time of year on the channel, Spooktoberest. This play on Oktoberfest, which apparently isn't even in October as I learned this year, is when I focus all of my videos on the Vampire Counts, Vampire Coast, and Tomb Kings. You may have noticed, if you've been around for a while, that those guys haven't shown up in a video since October of last year. There's a reason for that. I was saving all of their stuff for this month. I'm personally super excited for it, as they're definitely my favorite evil factions. Yes, even the Tomb Kings. They're not classified as evil, but come on. They're definitely evil. Anyways, if you like the undead and haven't subscribed yet, this is the time to do so, because there's going to be a lot of vampires, ghouls, and skeletons on the channel for the next month or so. This is also a big deal for me for another reason. It's the second Spooktoberest, which means I had to have a first one, which means I've been making videos for a year now. Apparently I've been doing it even longer than that, as my first lore video, Sigmar's Sons, actually came out on September 27th, 2022. That's crazy. It feels like yesterday that I was getting all my stuff together and desperately trying to figure out how to use my computer microphone to make videos. Hint, don't do that. Use a real microphone instead. Anyways, a big part of why this has been so fun and felt so easy is all of you guys. Your support, comments, and general engagement has made this much more rewarding than just screaming into the void for like 3 people, 2 of whom I know. So thank you for tuning in. It really means the world for me. With all that mushy stuff out of the way, I've run out of stuff to say, so until next time, this has been Sigmar's Chosen, signing off for now.